Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Emir Hashem Daf Ayin Amid Beis, and I hope that we will be completing this very complex, very fascinating and beautiful Siman Kuf Samaches. We pick up today on Ayin Amid Aleph, 4 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Kuf Samaches Sif Tes Vav. Before we begin, our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanesunim Batzara Ubashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yitziem Mitzarla L'Rvacha Me'afelo L'Oiro Mishibet L'Geula, Hashta Bagala V'Zman Kariv V'Nemar Amen. Our learning should also be a schus for Shalema for our real Yosef ben Miriam Rezel and for Miriam ben Chayesara, who are in need of Rachamei Shamayim. So, we pick up today, again, Ayin Amud Aleph, 4 lines off the bottom, Siman Kuf Samaches Sif Tes Vav. Says the Mechaber, Troiknin. We have a product called Troiknin. What are Troiknin? Hainu, Sha'osim Guma Bakira. This is where they would make a depression in the floor of the oven. V'noistin ba kamach umayim. And they would put in flour and water, mu'uravin ba. Let me read this properly. You see, this is a little bit catchy, and we have to be very meduyik. We have to be medayik in the lashon of the mechaber here. So again, troiknin, dahainu, shaisim guma bakira. They would make a depression in the floor of the oven. I think this means that the floor of their ovens were generally covered with a buildup of coal and ash, etc., etc. So you make a depression in the floor of the oven, v'noisnim ba, and you place in it. Now the word ba means in it. What is the object of ba? What's the it? The object of this word ba is the hole in the floor of the oven. V'noisnim ba, you place in the floor of the oven, kamach, flour, umayim mu'uravin ba, that has water mixed into it. The object of the second word ba is the kemach. So you're making a depression in the oven, in the floor of the oven, and you're putting into it flour with some water mixed into it. V'nefasham, and it will become baked over there. Mevarach alav bare mine mezaynais. The final product over here, the berachah rishona, is a mezaynais, uberachah achas me'en shalosh, and the noch bracha, the berachah achrona, will be an ala michya, a berachah achas me'en shalosh, not birkas hamazon. So, what exactly do you have over here? It seems that what you did was, you made a depression in the floor of the oven, and you poured in, what did the mechaber say? Flour with water mixed into it. Now note what the mechaber does not say. This is not a dough, right? Every dough is water and flour. But we don't call dough flour with water mixed into it. We call it an isa. So it's certainly not a blila ava. It sounds like it's not even really a blila raka. A blila raka is a batter. We don't call a batter flour with water mixed into it. We call it a blila raka. We call it a batter. Over here, you have a depression in the floor of the oven, and you're pouring in flour with water mixed into it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the reason why this final product is going to be a mezaynais, he brings down from the Magen Avram that this is a blila raka me'oid. This is not just a blila raka similar to a cake batter. In other words, a liquid batter that you could pour. It's not even a batter. It's flour with water. It's really something, almost a liquid, like water with some flour suspended into it. And therefore, says the Magen Avram, this is not just a blila raka. And in the sequence of the mechaber, this would make sense. Till now, yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about a blila raka, and we said that blila raka is not necessarily counter to the bracha of hamoitzi. We had the Ramah that said that if you have a bli laraka, if you have a bread bli laraka, flour and water without a lot of other flavorings that are going to make it possible b'kisnin, but if you have a bread bli laraka and you bake it in an oven, it's going to be hamoitzi. Now, says the Mechaber, but there is a bli laraka that cannot be a hamoitzi. There's a bli laraka that's mezainos. What bli laraka is that? That's troiknin. Troiknin is such a bli laraka, it's such a liquid that you pour, it just doesn't have teres lechem. It's not like lechem at all. And therefore, that's going to be a mezainos. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside, and then I'll tell you a different pshat. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Peiches. Kemach u'mayim. I'm a Magen Avram. Take a look at the Magen Avram. Shekasav writes, She'oisid bli losa raka ma'oid. This is something that's a bli lo raka ma'oid. It's mamish a liquid. Ulahachi mevarach aleh bari minim mezainos, and therefore the bracha on it is bari minim mezainos b'deloi kava, as long as you're not kaveh sud on it. The iloi haya bli losa raka kolkach. If it wouldn't be bli losa raka ad ma'oid, if it would just be the kind of bli laraka that we discussed yesterday, then mavor b'sif yodalid, then we already saw in the Ramah in Sif Yodalid, that afilu bli losa raka, even when you have a bli laraka, kol shel b'soif haisa afuya b'tanor, as long as in the end you take the bli laraka and you bake it in an oven, mevarach hamoitzi. And then he says, v'ayin bir halacha. So again, so far what we saw over here in the Mechaber is, you have this troiknin, where you're making a depression in the floor of the oven, and you're pouring into it a mixture of flour and water, which is a bli laraka ad ma'oid. It's a very, very, very liquidy batter. The bracha is mezainos and alamichya. Now continues the Mechaber 2 lines off the bottom, v'im kava sudasei alav. But if you are kaveh suda on this troiknin, then mevarach hamoitzi u'berkas hamazon. If you're kaveh suda, it could become elevated to hamoitzi and berkas hamazon. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut peites mevarach hamoitzi the afagav shebetchilasa haisaraka, because even though initially this was this bli laraka ad ma'oid, and therefore we said that it's going to be a mezainos, nevertheless, since you're baking it in a contained depression in the floor of the oven, so that the final product, the final dough that is going to be formed while it's baking in that guma is going to combine, it's going to be miskabetz, it's going to form a loaf, Nasikamai pas. Therefore, it does have a comparability factor to bread, and if you're kaveh suda, it becomes hamoitzi. So let's recap troiknin for a moment. Through the eyes of the Mishnah Berurahs that we just learned, and these Mishnah Berurahs are based on the Magen Avram. We have this product called troiknin. How is troiknin made? The way troiknin was made was you never went ahead and made a dough. You never needed a dough. You never even went ahead and mixed up a batter. All you did was you took some flour, you poured water into it. Now you took that, which is extremely liquidy, and you poured it into a guma, into a depression in the floor of the oven, and you let it bake. What's the halacha? Says the Mechaber, the halacha is very similar to Pasa Bobikistin. Since it's really not lechem-like, it's mamish bli laraka ad ma'oid, which is just has no similarity whatsoever to lechem. Says the Magen Avram, since it's bli laraka ad ma'oid, if you're not kaveh suda on it, you're not going to make hamoitzi. If you're not kaveh suda on it, it's mezainos and it's al hamichya for the bracha achroina. However, lamaisa at the end of the day, when this finishes being baked, it was baked in a depression in the floor of the kira. So it was baked in a container. It was baked in a form. And the final product is going to be like a loaf. And therefore the final product has some kind of tayar lechem to it. Therefore, it's at least like Pasa Babakistan, that if you are Kaveh Suda on it, you have to make Hamaitzi and Birkas Hamazon. That seems to be pshat in Troiknin, according to the Mishnah Berurah following the Magen Avram. But then, at the end of Eis Katan Peiches, the Chavetz Chaim said, Ayin Bebir Halacha. He sent us to the Bir Halacha. Now, the Bir Halacha brings down two other pshatim in Troiknin. Two other ways of understanding why Troiknin should be why it is that we said yesterday in the Ramah that a blila raka is generally speaking hamaitzi if you bake it in an oven, and yet here by the Troiknin, where you bake it in a depression in the floor of the oven, suddenly it's not hamaitzi, it's mezainos. The distinction that the Magen Avram is making is that yesterday's blila raka in the Ramah and Sif Yodalid was a normal blila raka, kind of like a cake-like batter. But today's Troiknin is a blila raka ad ma'od. That's the distinction that the Magen Avram makes. That's why a regular blila raka that you bake in an oven could be a hamaitzi, but the blila raka of Troiknin is mezainos unless you kaveh suda on it. Why? Because it's a blila raka ad ma'od. That's the distinction of the Magen Avram. Says the Bir Halacha, there are two other pshatim. Take a look at the Bir Halacha, Dibra Maskal, Kemach Umayim Uravin Ba. Ayin b'Magen Avram, Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Magen Avram, Ve'etaknuhu b'Mishnah Berurah, and that's the Magen Avram that I brought down in the Mishnah Berurah. Ve'da, and you should know, D'lefi ha'mavur tam din zeh b'Rambam. According to the rationale that we learn about this halacha in the Rambam, l'chayra ein anu mechrachin l'chilukay shel Magen Avram. We don't need the distinction of the Magen Avram. Va'afilu ein a raka b'yoser, even if the Troiknin is not a blila raka ad ma'od. Even if it's not any more liquidy than the blila rakas that we spoke about yesterday, there's still a reason why Troiknin would be mezainos, and the blila raka that we spoke about yesterday is hamaitzi. Why? Afal pikein kol shaloi kava ein mevarich aleh hamaitzi. Troiknin, as long as you're not kaveh suda, you should not make hamaitzi. Dizel lashon Rambam b'Perek Gimel halacha tes, because here we have the lashon of the Rambam in Hilchas Brachas Perek Gimel halacha tes, where the Rambam says, "Isa shenefa b'karka," a dough that was baked in the ground, k'may sheha arviyim shoichnei hamidbariyos oisin, like the Arabs who live in the desert were wanted to do, where they dug a hole in the ground and they baked their bread inside the ground. Hu pirish al kuva da'ara hanemar b'Talmud. This is what the Gemara in Brachas calls kuva da'ara. V'hashulchan aruch nimshach achaloshen arosh v'HaTorah v'huhu. And this that we're talking about over here, that we're calling Troiknin, is kuva da'ara. The Gemara in Brachas talks about a product called kuva da'ara, something that was baked in the ground, and the Rosh in Brachas says that is called Troiknin. And that's why we're identifying Troiknin as something that's baked in a depression in the bottom of the oven, which is similar to baking something in a depression in the ground. And the Rambam says, Hayil ve'eino le'at tzuras pas, since the final product doesn't really have tzuras pas, mevarich aleh barei mina mezainos. You make a barei mina mezainos. Ve'im kava, but if you're kaveh suda on it, you make hamaitzi. Harei, says the Chavetz Chaim, the ikaratam mishum de'eino le'at tzuras pas. So you see from the Rambam that the main reason why you make a mezainos on Troiknin is not because it's a blila raka ad ma'od. The main reason you make a mezainos on Troiknin is because the Rambam says it doesn't have tzuras pas. Now, why is it that you make hamaitzi if you kaveh suda on it? I'm not sure. Maybe according to the Rambam, the truth is I have a Rambam. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. I'm not going to be able to find it very quickly, so I'm not going to look now. I'll look later. But what the Rambam seems to be saying is Troiknin does not have enough of a tzuras pas to allow it to have a bracha of hamaitzi and berkas hamazon. If you're kaveh suda on it, then somehow it gets elevated to hamoitzi and berachas hamazon. So far we have two pshatim over here of why troiknin are a mezainos. We have the Magen Avram that troiknin is a mezainos because even though a bli l'raka baked in an oven, the Ramah said yesterday is hamoitzi, but troiknin is a bli l'raka ad ma'od. It's another level of bli l'raka. If a cake batter is something that's thick but it's pourable, troiknin is mamish, you pour it right out. It's like a liquid. And therefore, it's not hamoitzi, it's a mezainos. Why is it that if you kaveh suda on it, it's hamoitzi? Because lamaisa, the final baked product, has a form. It's got a form factor, and it's a form factor of bread. It makes a loaf. So therefore, if you kaveh suda on it, it's hamoitzi. Then you have the Rambam. The Rambam says, why is it a mezainos? Not because it's a bli l'raka ad ma'od. The reason it's a mezainos is because it doesn't have tzuras hapas. What exactly does that mean that it doesn't have tzuras hapas? I'm not sure. But then the Bir Halacha brings down a lavush. V'hinei b'lavush kasavatam. The lavush writes that the reason why this troiknin is a mezainos is mishum she'ein zeh derech lisha, because this is not similar to bread. Bread, you need a dough. Over here, you didn't need a dough. V'loi derech afias lechem. Nor is it the way you normally bake bread. The way you normally bake bread is you put it in an oven and you bake bread. Over here, you didn't need a dough. You never made a dough. And you didn't bake it in the normal way. You made a hole and you poured it into a hole. That's not the way bread is baked. Pirush, says the Bir Halacha, Mishum she'ein derech lalush v'lefais b'kuva da'ara. By a kuva da'ara, by a troiknin, you don't knead it and you don't bake it in the normal way. So once again, we don't need the distinction of the Magen Avram. Now, what's interesting about the lavush is that if you take a look in the Gemara in Brachas on Daf Lamed Zayin, I think I wrote down the quote from the Gemara. Just have to find it in my mess of pages over here. Rashi. No, where is it? Rashi, when Rashi defines kuva da'ara, which is troiknin, Rashi says like this: Oisem mokayim chalal bikira. You make a hollow opening in the floor of the oven, and you place into it water and flour. So note what Rashi says. Rashi says you don't need a dough. You don't make a dough or make a batter and then put it into the depression in the kira. No. You make a depression in the kira, then you take a scoop of flour and you put it in flour. Then you take a cup of water and you pour in a cup of water. So the lavush seems very much to be following Rashi in Brachas. The lavush says, why is it that troiknin is not hamoitzi? Because it's mamish not made the way you make bread. The way you make bread is you combine flour and water, you knead it into a dough, and then you put it in the oven to bake it. That's not the way you make troiknin. The way you make troiknin is you never knead a dough. You just make a hole, you pour in the flour, you pour in the water, and you walk away. And you let it get baked that way. So this is why maybe the lavush says it doesn't pass to make a hamoitzi on troiknin, because it's mamish not made the way you make bread. Now, lamaisa, at the end of the day, if you kaveh suda on it, well, at the end of the day, if you kaveh suda on it, you're going to make a hamoitzi. Why? I guess because like the Magen Avram, at the end of the day, you have, when it's finally baked, you have something that has the form factor of bread. So since the end product has a form factor of bread, if you kaveh suda on it, you're going to make hamoitzi. Okay. Now, we have another product that is in contrast to troiknin. Boy, if I would put my papers into a notebook, it would be a lot easier to figure out what's going on over here. Where's my other paper? Okay. All right. Says the Mechaber weiter. 2 lines off the bottom on Ayin Amud Aleph, almost at the end of the line. So that's Troikdin. Now, says the Mechaber, Aval Tarisa. But now we have another product called Tarisa. Aval Tarisa, what's Tarisa? The Hainu, which is, says the Mechaber, Shaloichid Kemach Umayim. By Tarisa, you take flour and you take water, Uma Arvimaisa, and you mix it together, Vishoivchim al Hakira, and you pour it onto the floor of the oven. So this is kind of like pouring a pancake on a griddle. That's what it sounds like. But we're not talking about a pancake. A pancake, I don't want to get into it, but pancakes are flour and oil and eggs and sugar and vanilla. Pancakes are much more pasa babakistan. This over here is flour and water, and again, it's liquidy. Aval Tarisa. You take flour and water, and you mix it, and you pour it onto the hot surface of the kira. And because it's liquidy, it spreads out on the kira. V'nefa, and ultimately it bakes from the heat of the kira. Ein alav tairas lechem klal. That, the Mechaber says, has no tairas lechem at all. It's not similar to lechem at all. Ve'ein mevarcham alav elabayre mina mezainos, and you only make a mezainos on it. Ubracha achas me'ein shalosh, and the bracha achrayna is ala michya. Va'afilu kava sudasei alav, even if you're kaveh suda. So again, first we had troikdin. Troikdin, we said, there are 2 levels. Regular troikdin, if you're not kaveh suda on troikdin, it's bari mina mezainos and ala michya. If you're kaveh sudan troiknin, it gets elevated to Amoitzi and Berkas Hamazon. Now we have Tarisa. Tarisa, the Mechaber is saying, only Mezainis and Alamichya, even if you're kaveh suda, it cannot be Hamoitzi and Berkas Hamazon. Let's see, I think we have some Mishnah Berurah on this. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Sadik on Ayin Amud Beis. Va'afilu kava. Over here the Mechaber says, by Tarisa, even if you're kaveh suda on it, it's still only mezainos and alamichya. Hamagen Avram mitzadei, the Magen Avram is not happy with this. Hamagen Avram mitzadei, the Magen Avram takes the position, the bekava, that if you're kaveh suda on Tarisa, mevarach alav hamaitzi, you do make hamaitzi and berkas hamazon. V'cheinu das habach ledas HaTorah, and the Torah says that this is the opinion of the Bach as well. I'm sorry, the Bach says that this is the opinion of the Torah. The Bach came later than the Torah. The Kosav El Yerabba, the El Yerabba writes the Machmazeh, because we have this Machlokes, where we have the Mechaber on the one hand telling us that Tarisa is a Mezainos and an Alamichya, even if you're Kaveh Suda. And then we have a Bach, and we have a Magen Avram telling me that if you're Kaveh Suda on it, it's Hamoitzi. Therefore, the El Yerabba says, Ein la'achlai elotaycha seuda, you should not eat it unless you wash on something else. However, the Magid Gibayrim is machriya like the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch. So what exactly is this Tarisa? It sounds to me like the Mechaber held that Tarisa has all of the downside of Troiknin and none of the upside of Troiknin. What do I mean? So the way the Mishnah Berurah was understanding the Troiknin, the reason why Troiknin is a mezainos is because it's a blila raka ad moed. Well, that was a Magen Avram. But then we had the Levush and the Rambam that say that the reason why Troiknin is a mezainos is it doesn't have tzuras apas. The Levush said it's not made the way you make pas. You don't knead it and bake it in an oven. These are all of the downsides of Troiknin as far as the bracha of Hamoitzi versus the bracha of Mezainos. So the downsides of Troiknin It's a blila raka ad ma'oid. It doesn't have tzuras apas. You don't knead it into a dough. These are the downsides that make it a mezainos. What's the upside that makes it a hamaitzi if you're kaveh suda? The upside of it is that since you're baking it in a depression in the floor of the kira, it has a form, right? You pour it into a depression. As it bakes and thickens and solidifies, it's going to take the shape of the depression. So the final product is going to have the form factor of bread. It's going to have the form factor of a loaf, or at least a cake. Not so Teresa. Teresa seems to have all of the downsides of troiknin. It's a blila raka. You're pouring it onto the floor of the oven. So it's definitely a blila raka. You never kneaded it into a dough, so there's no lisha. It's not something that you're putting in the oven and baking. It's something that you're pouring out. So it has all of the downsides of troiknin, but it doesn't have the upside of troiknin. Troiknin, the end product, is going to have a form factor of a loaf because it's going to take the shape of the guma, of the hole in the depression in the floor of the oven that you bake it in. Not so the Teresa. Like the Mechaber said, the Teresa you're pouring on the floor of the oven and it's mispashet. It's just going to spread out, and whatever shape it ends up being, by the time it finishes spreading and starts to solidify through the heat process, that's the form it's going to be. But it's not going to be a loaf. It's not going to be a cake. It's going to be flat like a pancake. So therefore, says the Mechaber, troiknin could become hamaitzi and berachah hamazon if you kaveh suda on it. Because at least troiknin has the upside of the form factor. The Teresa, on the other hand, is never going to be elevated to hamaitzi and berachah hamazon, even if you kaveh suda on it, because it doesn't have that upside. That seems to be the way the Mechaber is understanding it. Now, the Magen Avraham is not happy with this. The Magen Avraham says, the same way troiknin could be hamaitzi and berachah hamazon if you kaveh suda on it, he says Teresa also should be hamaitzi and berachah hamazon if you kaveh suda on it. I think that if we're medayik in the Magen Avraham is not giving a lot of credence to this form factor argument. Seems to me that the Magen Avraham is learning troiknin. The Magen Avraham is learning troiknin and saying the only reason troiknin is downgraded to a mezainis is because it's a blila raka admoid. But at the end product, I don't see why the end product shouldn't be hamaitzi, at least if you kaveh suda. So too the Teresa. The Teresa is also going to be mezainis because it's a blila raka admoid. It's something that you just pour out and it's dispashet. But the final form, it also has epis Teresa Danama on it, and therefore it should also be hamaitzi and berachah hamazon if you're kaveh suda. The Aruch HaShulchan Lamaisa says troiknin, Teresa, we don't have them nowadays, and since we don't have them nowadays, it's not worth spending time on to be myrich on them. That's what the Aruch HaShulchan says. Now, because I mentioned pancakes, so first of all, again, pancakes would seem to be pasabah b'kistin because you load them full of meiperes, there's oil and eggs, and then there's tavlin, there's sugar, and sometimes vanilla, and other flavorings. So certainly it's not more than pasabah b'kistin. Then you have the question of kviyas suda. So first of all, also, it's not baked. It's fried. Paisik wanted to tell me that he considers pancakes to be baked because he thinks that the oil that you put in the pan to make pancakes is only so that the batter shouldn't catch. So that's a case of baked in a pan with oil that's only a schmear so that it shouldn't catch. That's called baked. Lahalacha. Not when I make pancakes, for sure not. All of the pancakes that I ever experienced are fried in oil. So it's a real genuine pasabah b'kisnin. How much of it do you eat already? Be kaveh suda on the pancakes. But it's definitely not more than pasabah b'kisnin. Okay, weiter. Now on Ayin Amid Beis, second line down, Sifteh Zayin. Nama de Hindika. I've seen Hindika Art Scroll wants to translate Dehindika as Indian. Nahama Dehindika, they, in Masechtas Brachas, they translate it as Indian bread. Nama Dehindika, what is Nama Dehindika? Says the Mechaber, V'hu lechem she'oifin bashpud. This was a dough that you would put on a skewer. So you would take dough and insert a skewer into the dough and then bake it over a fire. V'hu lechem she'oifin bashpud. This is a bread-like dough that you bake on a skewer. And while it's slow baking on the spit, you take oil, you take egg, and you're constantly smearing the dough as it bakes. That's lechem dehindika. V'chein, similarly, says the Mechaber, lechem ha'aseh lekutach, bread that was baked for the purpose of crumbling it up and using it to make a dip that was prevalent in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, called kutach. It was breadcrumbs mixed with milk and vinegar and other ingredients. So lechem ha'aseh lekutach she'ein oifen oisoi betanor. This bread was generally not baked in an oven. Ela b'chama. It was baked in the heat of the sun. Mevarach alav barei minei mezainos. On both of these items, you make a barei minei mezainos. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Tzadik Aleph. Nama dehindika. So the phraseology of the Mechaber is a little bit funny, and that's what the Chavetz Chaim is going to hinge on. Let's take a look back at the beginning, the first few words of Sifteh Zayin. Nama dehindika. What is Nama dehindika? Hu lechem. Now lechem is bread. V'hu lechem, that is bread. She'oifen bashpud, that you bake on a skewer. What that sounds like is you took bread, right? You took challah, you inserted a skewer into it, and now you're toasting it over a fire and you're smearing it with oil and with eggs. Now, if that's what the Mechaber meant, then the berachah would not be a mezainos. The berachah would be hamaitzi. If you have bona fide 100% bread, baked bread, and you stick it on a skewer and you toast it over a fire, smearing stuff on it, why would it be downgraded from hamaitzi to a mezainos? We had a whole Sif Yud Gimel. What if you took 100% bona fide bread and you cooked it in a pot? We said if the pieces are more than a kezayis, it's still going to be hamaitzi, even if it loses tayar lechem. Even if it doesn't look like bread anymore. Why? Because since it was bread and it's bigger than a kezayis, it still is bread. But over here, you're not even cooking it in a pot. It's not going to lose tayar lechem. From toasting it on a spit, it's not going to lose tayar lechem. So the Mishnah Berurah says clearly you cannot understand the Mechaber that way. The Mechaber is not talking about finished, baked 100% bread that you now put on a skewer and toast. That's not what the Mechaber means. What the Mechaber means is it's dough. It's a bread dough. So you mamish needed a bread dough. You made a blila ava. You made a genuine bread dough. And then you stuck it on a skewer. So instead of baking it in an oven, you stuck it on a skewer and you're making a kebab. And you're baking it over a flame. And you're smearing it with oil and may beitzim. That's what's going on over here. So says the Mishnah Berurah in Eis Katan Tzadik Aleph, V'hu lechem. The Mechaber wrote it is bread. Kaloimar, that is to say butzik. What he means is it's a bread dough. It's not bread. The lechem sha'afoi b'shpud, because if it was actually finished bread that you now toasted on a shpud, lechem gomerhu, that would be 100% lechem, and of course it would be hamaitzi and brikas hamazon. It wouldn't be mezainos. Eis Katan Tzadik Beis, on this Nama dehindika, and on the lechem that was aseh lekutach, mevarach alav barei minei mezainos, the berachah is a barei minei mezainos, hainu afilu b'dekava alayu. This would be true even if you're kaveh suda on these products. Pashtus, the reason for this is these are not prepared the way bread is prepared, and therefore the berachah is mezainos. Vayin B'Torah says, take a look at the Torah. De'im asa'a arucha v'na'a ke'en gluska. If you make a beautiful, nice braided loaf, mevarach ale hamaitzi, you make a hamaitzi, but v'hashulchan aruch hishbit. But the Shulchan Aruch did not include, the Mechaber did not include that halacha here. I'm not going to get into it. Certainly, if you're going to eat enough of this Nama de Hindiko, or the Lechem Asel Lekutach, that your mamish going to eat until the point that you're satisfied, so now you have a Shaila Daraisa of benching. Remember what we always say, when you eat enough to be fully satiated, now you have a Shaila of Birkas Hamazon Daraisa. So says the Mishnah Berurah, if you eat enough of this stuff, that you have a Shaila of benching with Daraisa, you shouldn't eat that much of it unless you're washing on something else so that you know that you will be able to bench. Okay, now finally we're going to come to Sif Yud Zayin, and we're really going to close out Siman Kuf Samaches with a blast, because this halacha of Sif Yud Zayin really it sheds a lot of additional confusion onto the question of what berachah to make on pizza, on calzones. So we're going to close out Siman Kuf Samaches with a little bit of a bang. So by way of hakdama to Sif Yud Zayin, if you go back to Ayin Amid Aleph, in the Ramah in the middle of Sif Yud Gimel, in Sif Yud Gimel we discussed, and this is something that we've gone back to already many, many times, we discussed a Belila Ava. So you go ahead and you make mamish a bread dough. Not a pasababa kistin. We're not talking about again, flavorings and spices. We're talking about a bread dough. You go ahead and you make a regular Belila Ava bread dough. But now, instead of baking it, you go ahead and you cook it or you fry it. So over there we had the Machlokes, the Dei Rishona, and the Yesh Chalkim. The Dei Rishona said, if it ain't baked, it ain't bread. If you didn't bake it, it's not bread. So you had, I don't care, you had a beautiful Belila Ava, but instead of baking it into bread, you went there and you cooked and you fried it. It's not bread. And therefore the bracha is mezainos and alamichya, not hamaitzi and berachas hamazon. The Yesh Chalkim said, if you started out with a beautiful Belila Ava bread dough, and now you cooked it and fried it, but the end product is something that mamish has tayar lechem, so the Yesh Chalkim said, I don't understand. You started with a Belila Ava, so you started with something that's like bread, and you prepared it the way you prepare bread, and okay, you did something funny, you cooked it and you fried it, but at the end of the day, the final product has tayar lechem, so the final product is something that is bread-like. So the Yesh Chalkim said, it's hamaitzi and berachas hamazon. So we had this big machlokes. Because of this machlokes, the Mechaber came along, and the Mechaber said, even though we paskin ultimately, like the Dei Rishona, that this boiled or fried end product is really a mezainos, but a Yerei Shamayim should be chayshish for the Yesh Chalkim, and therefore a Yerei Shamayim should not eat such a preparation unless he's eating it teichas suda and he washed on something else. Then the Ramah in Sif Yud Gimel came along, and he mentioned a food that we are familiar with. He mentioned kreplach. And he said that kreplach have tayar lechem. What's kreplach? You made a Belila Ava, you made a dough, a Belila Ava, then you took meat, you put it into the dough, you folded over the dough, and you made a pocket of dough filled with meat, and then what did you do with it? You cooked it, or you fried it. So says the Ramah, kreplach is a perfect example of this item that we're talking about, that's a machlokes, the Dei Rishona and the Yesh Chalkim. Why? Because it's a Belila Ava, and the end product, says the Ramah, has tayar lechem. Now, many of you might be shaking your head. You're saying, I don't see how kreplach has tayar lechem. I'm not getting into that right now. I'm accepting the Ramah for his word. The Ramah says that kreplach have tayar lechem. You want to say that the Ramah's kreplach were different than our kreplach? Fine. I don't want to get into it right now for the purposes of Sif Yud Zayin. But the bottom line is, again, we had the Machlokes, the Dei Rishayna, and the Yesh Chokim. The Ramah came along and the Ramah said that the dough of kreplach is a perfect example of an item that falls into this machlokes of the Dei Rishayna and the Yesh Chokim, because it starts off as a blila ava. At the end, it has tayar lechem. It's not baked. It's either boiled or fried. So according to the Dei Rishayna, it would be a mezainis. According to the Yesh Chokim, it would be a maitzi. Since the Mechaber said that a Yerei Shamayim should be chayshish for the Yesh Chokim, you should not eat kreplach unless you're going to wash on something else. That's what the Ramah said. Now, the Mishnah Berurah over there in Sif Yud Gimel right away made mention, okay, kreplach are filled with the meat. Now, wait a second. We said that when you have a dough pocket and you fill it with something, it becomes pasa babakistan. So why is the Ramah here in Sif Yud Gimel telling me that this fits into the machlokes of the Dei Rishayna and the Yesh Chokim? The Dei Rishayna and the Yesh Chokim aren't talking about pasa babakistan. The Dei Rishayna and the Yesh Chokim are talking about a regular blila ava, a bread dough, and the halach yelech between the Dei Rishayna and the Yesh Chokim is whether frying and baking is akin to, whether frying and boiling is akin to baking, not pasa babakistan. So the Mishnah Berurah keyed us in Sif Yud Gimel of the possibility that we are now going to learn about in Sif Yud Zayin, which is that a dough pocket that's filled with something like meat is not pasa babakistan. A dough pocket that's filled with peiros, an apple strudel, a dough pocket that's filled with potatoes, a knish, a dough pocket that's filled with nuts and sugar, or chocolate, or cinnamon, mine mesika, sweets, that's pasa babakistan. Why? Because that's something that is eaten for kinuach. That is something that's eaten as a snack. It's something that's eaten as a dessert. You're not kaveh suda on it. And that's why it becomes pasa babakistan. And if you're eating it without being kaveh suda, it's a mezainis. And if you kaveh suda, it's hamaitzi. But when you make a dough pocket and you fill it with meat, meat is a suda food. Therefore, it's not pasa babakistan. And I'll explain to you very simply why. Is there any shiloh that you would be kaveh suda on a pastrami sandwich? Of course you would be kaveh suda on a pastrami sandwich. What's a pastrami sandwich? A pastrami sandwich is 2 slices of bread with meat in between them. So now let me ask you a question. If it's a davar pashut that you should wash on a pastrami sandwich, which is 2 pieces of bread with pastrami in the middle, then how about if I take bread dough and I wrap pastrami in it and I bake it like that? At the end of the day, when it comes out, what do I have? I have a pastrami sandwich. I have baked bread with pastrami inside. So, in the case of the pastrami sandwich, I baked bread, and then I sliced the bread, I put pastrami inside, I put on mustard, and I ate it that way. That way you're telling me it's a davar pashut that you have to wash. In the other case, I took unbaked bread dough, I wrapped it around pastrami, maybe I even put mustard inside, I stuck it in the oven and I baked it. When it comes out, I basically have bread and pastrami. Why shouldn't I wash and make hamaitzi? And this is something that you definitely would be kaveh suda on. This is not something that's made for kinuach. This is not something that's made for a snack or for a side dish or for dessert. This is a pastrami sandwich. It's something that you would be kaveh suda on. So the Mishnah Berurah keyed us into this concept already back in Sif Yud Gimel. Now, it wasn't so negeya in Sif Yud Gimel, really, because ultimately in Sif Yud Gimel, we were talking about kreplach, they weren't baked. The kreplach that we spoke about in Sif Yud Gimel were baked or fried. So, in the context, to put everything that we just said together, in Sif Yud Gimel, what the Ramah said is, we have a machlokes today, Rishona, and the Yesh Cholkim, on what the halacha is when you have a blila ava that instead of baking, you boil or you fry. Said the Ramah, kreplach is a perfect example. Now, what's kreplach? It's a blila ava that you bake or fry, and it's filled with meat. Said the Mishnah Berurah, wait a second, if it's filled with meat, doesn't that make it possible b'kisnin? Said the Mishnah Berurah, no, it doesn't make it possible b'kisnin. Why? Because we're going to see in Sif Yod Zayin that dough that's filled with meat is not possible b'kisnin. Dough that's filled with nuts, with sugar, with fruit, with potatoes, that's possible b'kisnin. But if it's filled with meat, it's not possible b'kisnin. And that's why the Ramah says that kreplach are a perfect example of the machlokes between the Day Rishayna and the Yesh Cholkim. Now, in Sif Yod Zayin, we're going to talk about kreplach again. But now we're going to talk about kreplach that are baked. Not kreplach that are boiled and fried. Kreplach that were boiled or fried. That, says the Ramah, falls into the machlokes of the Day Rishayna and the Yesh Cholkim. Because it's a blila ava that's not baked. It's a blila ava that's only boiled or fried. In Sif Yud Zayin, we're going to talk about kreplach that are baked. What's the halacha of kreplach that are baked? Now, what are kreplach called in the language of the Mechaber and in the language of the Ramah? Pashtida. That's what we saw on Ayin Amud Aleph in Sif Yud Gimel. On the top line, the Ramah says, Avol Pashtida, ukreplach. And the Mishnah Berurah said in Ice Cut and Pay, Pashtida is kreplach. It's a blila ava dough that's filled with meat. Now, let's go to Sif Yud Zayin. Says the Mechaber, Pashtida hane'efes betanur. Pashtida that's actually baked in an oven. It's not cooked or fried. Pashtida hane'efes betanur bebasar oy bedogim oy begvina. And the filling is a Suda food. The filling is meat. The filling is fish. The filling is cheese. Mivarech aleh hamoitzi uberkas hamazayin. What's the bracha? Hamoitzi and berkas hamazayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Sadi Gimel hane'efes betana v'hu adin hanefe be'ilfis b'loi mashke. Or if you put it in a pan without oil, again, that's always considered baking. Eis Katan Sadi Dalid mivarech alav hamaitzi. You make hamaitzi. Says the Chavetz Chaim, hainu afilu b'deloi kava alayu. You make a hamaitzi even if you're not kavei afsuda. V'loi dami lepasapa b'kistin. And this is not the same as pasapa b'kistin. The pirushai, because the explanation of pasapa b'kistin is pas, bread, hamamula b'perois, that's filled with fruit, ubetavlin, flavorings, hamavur b'siv zayin, deloi mavarach alayu hamaitzi b'deloi kavasuda alayu. This is not like pasapa b'kistin where you don't make a hamaitzi if you're not kavei suda. Why? The shani hasam, because pasapa b'kistin is different. De'ein asuyin elo l'kinuach suda l'masika. Because pasapa b'kistin is made for a snack or for a dessert. They're sweets. Mashe einkein pashtida shemamula basar. Contrast that to a pashtida that's filled with meat. Derech la'achlam l'ravain. That's something that you eat as a meal. That's something that you eat to satisfy your hunger. Ukedei lisbaya, to fill up. V'hevi k'may shar pasu basar. It's like any other bread and meat. Kishaychel ke'echad, that you eat together. Mali, a pastrami sandwich, which is 2 slices of rye bread, or club bread and pastrami, or dough that's wrapped around pastrami and you baked it together. The bottom line is it's bread and pastrami. So bread and pastrami, why wouldn't you wash? Of course you would wash and make hamaitzi. Now, when you walk away from this Mechaber and this Mishnah Berurah, let me ask you a question. What bracha do you make on a calzone? What's a calzone, Rabbi say? It's dough. It's a blila ava. And you make a pocket out of it. And you fill it up with cheese and mushrooms and spinach. What did the Mechaber say? Pashtida nefis petana bebasar oy bedagim oy begvina. Meat, or fish, or cheese. So, what's a calzone? Is it the calzone of pashtida? What does the Mishnah Berurah say? The Mishnah Berurah says, pashtida, you make hamaitzi even if you're not kaveh suda. Now, what's pizza? What's pizza, Rabbi say? Why isn't pizza pashtida? What's the difference between pizza and calzone? The fact that you made a pocket out of it? The fact that you made a pocket out of it is not negated to the berachah. The reason the Mechaber says that the pashtida is hamaitzi is not because you formed it into a pocket. It's because it is a bread dough that's being eaten together with a Suda food. In this case, cheese. So what's pizza? Pizza is a bread dough that's being eaten with a Suda food. It's being eaten with cheese. So a strict reading of the Mechaber in Sif Yud Zayin with the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Sadik Daled, it's very hard to walk away and say that pizza is a mezainos unless you're kaveh suda on it. Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Sadik Daled, pashtida is hamaitzi even if you're not kaveh suda. And I failed to see why pizza and calzones are not pashtida. Now, just so that you shouldn't walk away and say, Rabbi Weiss said that pizza is hamaitzi and calzones are hamaitzi even if you're not kaveh suda. I'm not ready to say that. The Paiskim talk about this, but a lot bigger Paiskim than me. And I have handed down to me from my Rebbe, Rebbe Feinstein Stark, that the Rishiva Zatzal Rav Moshe said that 2 slices of pizza you don't have to wash on. So clearly he didn't feel this way. Now the truth is, this is a machlokes, the Magen Avraham and the Taz. It's fascinating to me that the Mishnah Berurah doesn't tell you over here in Ois Katan Sadik Daled that he's following the Magen Avraham. But the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Sadik Daled is following the Magen Avraham. It's the Magen Avraham that says, you see, the Mechaber doesn't say that it's hamaitzi and berachas hamazon even if you're not kaveh suda. The Mechaber doesn't say that. The Magen Avraham says on this Mechaber it's hamaitzi and berachas hamazon even if you're not kaveh suda. The Taz says no. The Taz does not agree with what the Mishnah Berurah says over here that this is not pasa babakistan. The Taz says it is pasa babakistan, pashtida. And when the Mechaber says that the bracha is hamaitzi and berachas hamazon, he means only if you kaveh suda on it. But the Mishnah Berurah is clearly being machriya like the Magen Avraham, and he's being machriya like the Magen Avraham to the extent that he didn't even tell you that there's a Taz that's chaylik on the Magen Avraham, which means that the Mishnah Berurah really felt to be machriya like this Magen Avraham. And again, when you walk away from Sif Yud Zayin in the Mechaber, and you walk away from Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Sadik Daled, to my mind, very difficult to explain how, according to the Mishnah Berurah, you don't have to wash even on 1 slice of pizza, on a half of a calzone, even on if you want to eat a little piece of pizza crust, according to the Mishnah Berurah, unless you don't eat it with cheese. Unless there's no cheese on it. Because if there's only tomato sauce on it, that's pasa babakistan. The reason the Mishnah Berurah is saying that this pashtida is not pasa babakistan is because it's eating it with cheese. And cheese is a Suda food. So if you eat a tiny piece of pizza with cheese, according to Mishnah Berurah's Katan Sadik Daled, here in Mechaber Sif Yud Zayin, it would seem to me that you have to wash the tilas yadayim, you have to make hamaitzi, and if you eat a kazayis, you have to bench. Okay, I know we're running late, but I want to finish the Siman. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and Sadik Daled. V'nira pashat. However, having said that a dough filled with meat is not pasa babakistan because it's dough with a Suda food, still in all, the Mishnah Berurah says, v'nira pashat, it seems obvious. Demasuyin rikikin kitanim. If the dough is made into small little crackers, hors d'oeuvres, u'ma'orav behem petisin shel basar, and you just have a few pieces of pulled brisket on it, V'nikar she'en asuyim kim l'kinuach achar asuda, where it's obvious that this is being eaten as an hors d'oeuvre. So you have a frankenblank. A frankenblank, no. Nobody's being kaveh suda on a frankenblank. A frankenblank is very clearly an hors d'oeuvre. Even though it's bread and meat, but it's very clearly an hors d'oeuvre. An hors d'oeuvre, the Mishnah Berurah is saying, I agree, that you don't have to wash on. Dinoi mamish kepasha be'urev beperis or b'shar bina mesika, that would be the equivalent of pasa babikistin, where you have dough mixed with fruit or sweets. De'inim avarch alai berkas hamazon b'deloi kav alai. V'dan, you should know, says the Mishnah Berurah, the pasha nefa b'mei beitzim, when you have bread that's baked with eggs, the hainu mashikar kichlach, and that's where it's flour kneaded with eggs. Mistapik b'Magen Avram, the Magen Avram questions whether or not that's called paskistin. V'darch HaChaim v'Agras echlitu d'ubachal paskistin. The Darch HaChaim, the Gras say it's kistin. V'chein b'Magen Gibarim v'chein aminik. Achakach matzasi shkei kasav gam b'hanagas agra. U'mekamakim, nevertheless, kasav b'Magen Gibarim direi Shemayim lo yoichal kim k'shekalalishu hal mei beitzim. The Magen Gibarim says we shouldn't, Yirei Shemayim shouldn't jump to consider it pasa babikistin unless it's only kneaded with eggs and no water at all. V'loy nisar b'mayim klal. V'nira, and it would seem, says the Chavetz Chaim, d'udak v'yavesh, if you're talking about a cracker that's thin and dry, ein l'hachmer afilu nisar b'mayim, you don't have to be machmer, because that falls into another category of pasa babikistin, which are the thin, hard foods. Okay, says the Ramah, Hagah, the halacha of this pashtida, v'dafka sha'afoy b'taner b'lei mashke, the Ramah just reminds us this is only if you bake it in an oven without any liquid. So it's really called baked. But if you pour it into a pan with a copious amount of oil, that's frying it. Or it's another beverage, then it's cooking it. Then then you should only eat it teichasuda. That would be the Yirei Shemayim of Sif Yud Gimel. So just to tie up very succinctly what we just had over here in Sif Yud Zayin. In Sif Yud Zayin we had the halacha of what the Mechaber calls a pashtida. The Mechaber says that pashtida is a belila ava, so it's a real bread dough that you form into a pocket and you fill it with either meat or fish or cheese, some kind of a Suda food. The Mechaber said that the berachah is hamoitzi and berkas hamazon. The Mishnah Berurah explains that even though we learned earlier that if you take a bread dough and you make a pocket and you fill it with fruits or sweets or other such items, it's called pasa babikistin, and it's a mezainos unless you're kaveh suda. Says the Mishnah Berurah from the Magen Avram, this pashtida is different because it's filled with suda foods. It's filled with meat, it's filled with fish, it's filled with cheese. Those are Suda foods, and therefore the pashtida is not pasa babikistin. It's mamish a Suda food that you would have to wash on and bench on, even if you're not kaveh Suda on it. The exception that the Mishnah Berurah allowed for was an hors d'oeuvre. An hors d'oeuvre is a small piece of dough with a little bit of meat, or a little bit of cheese, or a little bit of fish. That's an hors d'oeuvre. That is pasa babikistin, because it's very clear that it's not intended for kviyas suda. It's very clear that it's intended as only a snack. Okay, wow. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. It's been a pleasure to learn Siman Kuf Samaches, Hilchos B'tzias Hapas, with you and to go through all of these complex sugyas. I hope that the Olam gets a chance to chazer it iber. I know I'm going to want to sit down and chazer it now. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu should send Yeshua's refuahs parnasa and shidduchim to those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the Geula Shlema with the Bias Koel Tzedek b'mehera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.